In the 3rd year of my marriage, the beautiful young mistress my husband was keeping outside appeared before me. When the girl saw me, she panicked, like an innocent princess from a fairy tale. I took a sip of my soup and calmly invited her to leave. Upstairs, Lucas leaned casually against the railing, taking his time as he paced. When our eyes met, he gave a careless smile. Emily, maybe you should try it too. Young, beautiful people, they're just different, aren't they? I knew he was just mocking me, knew that he always enjoyed grinding others' dignity beneath his feet, so I simply lowered my head and smiled. What Lucas didn't know was that I was playing a bigger game than he was, having hooked up with a prince of Beijing's high society. When I returned from a social engagement, I heard the sound of a spatula clattering in the kitchen. The light in the upstairs bedroom was still on. In the 3 years Lucas and I had been married, he had never stepped foot in the kitchen, and the housekeeper had long gone home by midnight. Pausing, I walked toward the kitchen. Seeing the busy girl inside didn't surprise me. Only as I got closer did I catch the scent of a sobering soup. In her early 20s, the girl was as delicate as a magnolia blossom. Her nightgown was ill-fitting, nearly grazing the floor, and the apron around her waist was tied improperly. Hearing someone approach, she smiled and called out, "Lucas, help me tie my apron." I obligingly stepped forward, gathered the loose ends, and tied a bow. She turned to face me with a smile, saying, "Didn't I tell you to rest?" Her unfinished words died in her throat as the porcelain spoon slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble floor, a shard brushing past my foot. Her face turned ashen as she stammered, "Miss Emily." My gaze settled on her neck and shoulders, where a series of red marks testified to my husband's recent enthusiasm. I smiled and calmly asked, "The sobering soup. Could you share some with me?" I can't quite remember when my marriage with Lucas started to fall apart. I only remember the first woman who came to our door. It was his former secretary. She took me by surprise when she arrived. When I opened the door, I saw her entangled with Lucas on the sofa we'd chosen together. Only when she noticed me did she feign surprise and pull away. Her acting was so terrible that it would earn her a 50-year blacklist if she tried it in show business. I knew Lucas was already drunk out of his mind that night, and I knew she was trying to take advantage of his drunkenness to make a big gamble. She was dismissed by Lucas soon afterward, and I wasn't surprised. My memory is sharp, so I instantly recognized the girl before me as Sophia, someone I'd seen about 4 months ago. That day, I was driving to Lucas's office. In the pouring rain, I watched as Lucas lifted her by the waist while his assistant held an umbrella over them. I watched him carefully place her into his car. The scene looked like something out of a romantic drama. I took a sip of my soup, casting an indifferent glance at the person standing beside the table. Sophia looked down, her fingers clenched so tightly they were turning white. I spoke, dismissing her, "It's late." She startled, raising her head, "I'll leave right away, Miss Emily." Obedient, sensible, aware of her place. No wonder Lucas kept her around for so long. She didn't mention wanting to go upstairs to check on Lucas, nor did she ask to change clothes. She simply took her phone and headed toward the door. Halfway there, she suddenly turned back. "Miss Emily," she said, "please remind Lucas to drink the sobering soup. Otherwise, he'll wake up with a headache again." I nodded in agreement. As soon as the door closed, Lucas appeared, slowly emerging from the bedroom. His sleepwear hung loosely, several buttons undone, revealing toned muscle beneath. I glanced at him briefly, then looked away. "You heard her, so I don't need to remind you." He murmured his assent and leaned on the railing, descending the stairs. I hadn't been open with Lucas in a long time. His string of lovers never ended. By the time I'd get a chance, it'd already be someone else's turn. Our marriage was on the brink of collapse. "Emily," he called my name softly, his tone gentle. I looked up. He looked at me and smiled. "Maybe you should try it too. Young people, they're just different." I looked at his impassive face and thought back to our wedding day. Everyone wore smiles, wishing us a lifetime of happiness together. Only my friend, fixing my gown in the dressing room, had a blank expression. Just before I walked down the aisle, she reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear and said quietly, "Emily." she said, welcome to the mire. Marriage in high society is more like an exchange of interests. On the surface, Lucas and I appeared as perfect as a display in a showroom. Passers-by would praise us as a match made in heaven, never suspecting the poor quality materials beneath the polished facade. Under the guise of wealth and power, sincerity in the upper class is a rare commodity. I never expected that the one to encourage me to cheat would be my husband. My phone on the table buzzed. I looked down to see a message from my young friend. Lucas took a seat across from me. I got up, dabbed my mouth with a napkin. I have something to take care of, so I'll be heading out. He gave a faint nod. There weren't many cars on the road late at night. I drove smoothly to the location Hunter had sent me. The bar entrance was crowded with cars, and a group of young people stood around talking. I immediately spotted Hunter under a streetlight. Tall and well-built, with broad shoulders and a narrow waist, he stood out even in the dim white light, casting shadows over his face, enhancing his beauty. I parked by the roadside and walked over, calling his name, Hunter. He looked up, but before he could speak, a girl stumbled out from behind him, positioning herself between us. The strong scent of alcohol made me wrinkle my nose. The girl pushed me hard, saying sharply, "Hey, where did you come from? You're so old, trying to flirt with a kid." I'm only 25. But after spending so much time in high society, I've inevitably absorbed some adult cunning, a sharp contrast to the innocence of students unscarred by the real world. She looked me up and down with disdain and sneered, "You don't really think Hunter would be interested in an old woman like you, do you?" I raised an eyebrow, but before I could respond, the person behind me grabbed her wrist. She winced in pain, her drunkenness sobering a little. "Hunter? She's my senior." Hunter's voice had a slight chill to it in the night. The girl paused, then lowered her head in apology. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean. My social circle doesn't need your interference, Ms. Zhao. We're not that close." He released her and added indifferently, "Maybe you should find a teacher to teach you some manners." The girl's face went pale. I could almost hear the sound of her heart breaking. Ouch, that was brutal. I first met Hunter at a bar as well. Lucas's constant scandals backfired on us both, and even the company's stock price was unfairly affected. I had to work to handle PR for him. Feeling frustrated, I went to a bar alone to unwind. Amidst the crowd at the counter, the bartender teased me with a smile, "Maybe a Prince Charming will come to rescue you from distress." I only shrugged and got up to go to the bathroom. On my way back, I stumbled upon a confession scene in the hallway. Amid the thumping music, I heard a girl's voice shouting with all her heart from around the corner, "I really like you. Will you be my boyfriend?" I couldn't hear his response clearly and, curious, poked my head out to see. I watched as the girl bowed her head and ran off. The young man turned, and I caught a clear view of his face. Hunter. The very prince of Beijing's elite, born with the purest golden spoon. My business instincts kicked in, and I made a snap decision. I stepped forward and lightly tapped him on the shoulder. "Sir, I'm not like those other women. I'm a married woman." The prince visibly tensed. A Prince Charming can do more than rescue a Cinderella. He can also mend the shattered heart of a married woman. After all, if I could work with Hunter's family, multi-million-dollar deals would be within reach. Winning over the prince was far easier than currying favor with the cunning old foxes in business. I, a graduate of many years, shamelessly used my professor's connections to reach Hunter, presenting myself as his senior. Back in my youth, charming women was a skill I excelled at, whether they were older sisters, younger cousins, or female teachers. Gentle women were always so soft-hearted. But Hunter was impenetrable. He deftly deflected all my advances, labeling all my kindness as simply friendliness between senior and junior. Just like tonight, I came to the bar out of concern for my junior, to pick up the drunk prince. When I started the car, Hunter had already settled into the passenger seat. "Thanks for the help tonight." I leaned over, pulled down the seatbelt from above, and buckled him in. He held his breath, his breathing slightly restrained, and didn't continue speaking. I could almost smell the faint scent of alcohol on him. I looked up, meeting his eyes, our noses almost touching. I teased him, "Why aren't you talking?" Hunter nearly jumped, immediately pushing me away, too close. His ears flushed red. He was like a ragdoll cat bristling in the winter. "Emily, can you speak normally?" I leaned back in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, and replied seriously, "You helped this old woman, so all I can do is repay you with my body." "Emily." The ragdoll cat bristled. "Yes?" I responded calmly. "Any instructions, young master?" The prince frowned, stayed silent, visibly displeased. After a long pause, I finally heard him mutter, "You're not old. So should I still repay you with my body?" The passenger seat remained quiet for a while. As the traffic light turned red, I glanced at Hunter out of the corner of my eye. The young man propped his chin on his hand, his gaze fixed on my hand. The diamond on my ring finger sparkled brightly, unmistakably a wedding ring. Lucas's was lost long ago, but I still wore mine all the time. Most people in our circle don't like wearing wedding rings. Love and loyalty, they don't seem to have any place in these hollow marriages. Naturally, I was seen as an anomaly. At first, they laughed, suggesting Lucas might become the next man under his wife's thumb. But I never made a fuss. So later, they admired him, saying he was incredibly lucky to have a wife who loved him so deeply. So deeply, she even tolerated his affairs. Just as the car light turned from yellow to green, I heard Hunter's calm voice, "I don't date married women." The next day at the auction, I ran into my friend Madeline. She glanced at the dark circles under my eyes and said without holding back, "Finally decided to find someone? Just take care of yourself." "No, just played chauffeur late last night." Madeline gave me a once-over, musing, "I'm starting to think the prince is quite skilled himself." I neither confirmed nor denied it. I had my eye on a ruby necklace at the auction, planning to buy it and deliver it to Hunter's mother tomorrow. Graceful gestures and thoughtful gifts are essential skills for any competent businessperson. I was there solely for that necklace. The auction staff brought out the final piece of the event, a beautiful, intricate necklace that sparkled under the lights. I didn't bother listening to the introduction. As soon as the starting price was announced, I raised my paddle and bid. The auctioneer called my bid. Someone immediately raised the bid. The numbers crept up. 3,320,000. 350,000. After a brief thought, I raised my paddle again. 380,000. No one responded. Any further bids? The auctioneer continued, 380,000, going once. 380,000, going twice. 400,000. He ground his teeth and called my name, his ears flushed. "I just wanted to thank you for everything. Let me treat you to dinner." "Just the two of us?" Food and drink are part of human nature's deepest desires. A single man and woman having dinner alone, young master, your intentions aren't so pure, are they? I reached out and pinched Hunter's cheek. He flinched, dodging away, as if scalded. Startlingly innocent. "If you're too busy, then forget it." Hunter averted his gaze, his tone awkward. "Of course, I'm free." I chuckled, "See you Friday." I had a feeling Sophia would come to find me. I didn't expect her to arrive so quickly. When the message arrived on my phone, I was in the middle of dealing with some documents. After receiving the message, I pushed the documents toward Ava. "I'll be back in about half an hour. Can you handle the meeting for the first 5 minutes?" She nodded in agreement. I went downstairs, drove to the cafe Sophia had chosen, which was not far from Lucas's company. As soon as she saw me, she immediately stood up. "Miss Emily." I nodded. She smiled and said, "I remember you don't like coffee, so I ordered fruit tea for you. Is that all right?" I gave a slight nod. "You said you had something to tell me. What is it?" Sophia looked at me, her eyes reddening, and then she lowered her head and gently touched her flat stomach. "Miss Emily, I'm pregnant. I grew up in a single-parent household without a father. I know how difficult it is for a child to grow up without a father. It's much harder than for others. Miss Emily. I hope my child can have a complete family." I took a sip of the fruit tea. I remember Lucas has always been very responsible in this regard. The fact that there are no illegitimate children is one of the main reasons I've tolerated him this long. Sophia's tears fell onto the table, one by one, like stars in the sky. It's because I didn't take my medicine that day. Miss Emily. She raised her head to look at me, her tears making her look heartbreakingly beautiful. It's my fault. I love him too much, Miss Emily. I'll only ever love Lucas in this life. I've always thought Lucas was stupid, and the women he kept on the side were equally foolish. Just when I thought I could tolerate Sophia a little, I realized she was still just as foolish. I watched her cry coldly, then glanced at the time, feeling I could finish earlier than half an hour. Sophia. I called her name calmly. Do you know why I came to see you today? She froze for a moment, her eyes red, looking like the little jade rabbit in the sky, pitiful. My time is valuable. I really don't want to get involved in Lucas's emotional debts. I've received plenty of messages like yours in the past and treated them as spam. But you're different. You're very beautiful. I rarely compliment someone's looks, but she really was an exceptional beauty. Beautiful enough for me to free up half an hour for her. After all, a beautiful woman is always pleasing to the eye. I pulled out a tissue, stood up, and gently wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes. Please. With your face, can you get Lucas to divorce me? The day Hunter came to pick me up, he drove himself. I looked around outside, a little stunned. I'm done competing with you rich people. I spent every day scheming with others in the business world, and yet compared to the prince, who was born with everything, it all seemed pointless. Hunter chuckled a little. Aren't you doing the same? I hesitated for a moment. Can I sit in the front seat? Won't sitting in the back make you seem like my driver? Sit in the front seat. When I was young, I heard people say that in the end, you'll become the person you hate the most. I spoke first. Hunter replied as he drove, What kind of person do you hate? Rich people. The restaurant Hunter had booked had a great atmosphere. We sat by the window, chatting casually. Halfway through our meal, the waiter pushed a small card over with a birthday cake on it. I looked up in surprise, and the young man met my gaze, smiling. Happy birthday. I didn't know what to get you, so I'll just treat you to a meal. I smiled. I know that people in this circle are sharp, and with Hunter's special status, he's undoubtedly not lacking in wits. He probably sees through my intentions. The best way to bring two strangers closer is through a seemingly ambiguous relationship. But Hunter always manages to stay right on the edge of that line, never crossing it. It's not that he doesn't know what gift to give. It's just that, compared to gifts that could last, a meal was the perfect way to put our relationship in the right place. But why? If I disliked him, I could simply keep my distance. Hunter's identity meant that few people in this circle could challenge him. I took a bite of the cake but didn't speak. Suddenly, the lights in the restaurant flickered, and the piano music turned extremely romantic. Several waiters came over holding flowers and wheeled out a large cake with two lifelike figurines on top. I propped my chin up and overheard the waiters telling the couple at the next table, Happy anniversary, wishing you a lifetime of happiness and love. Quite a grand gesture. I sighed. How happy. Hunter looked over, his expression complex. Maybe your husband has prepared a surprise like this for you at home. He fumbled over his words. I looked at him and smiled. Hunter met my eyes and, after a long pause, lowered his gaze as if avoiding mine. You really aren't curious about me at all, I teased him. I reached out and propped up his chin, pointing toward the happy couple. One of them was Sophia, whom he had met before. The other one, well, there's my husband, right there. At the moment Hunter stood up, his movement almost knocked over the wine glass on the table. I quickly reached out and grabbed his wrist. The young man paused, lowering his head to meet my gaze, which was full of smiles. The anger on his face softened a bit. For the first time, the prince didn't pull my hand away like he always did in the past, as if avoiding a plague. I propped my chin up and smiled at him. How about joining me for a drink? When I sent Hunter to the hotel, I hadn't drunk much, and neither had he. It was only when I was about to say goodbye that I suddenly heard him ask, "Emily, our first meeting, that day, it was because of him, you went to the bar, right?" Hunter sat in the chair, looked up, and met my gaze without flinching. His pale skin had taken on a faint blush from the alcohol, but his eyes, like a night full of stars, were shockingly bright. Since the day I met Hunter, he seemed to have been rejecting everyone. Indifferent, noble. A high-born gentleman cultivated with good family traditions. But when it came to me, there were moments when he occasionally revealed a trace of youthful vulnerability. Perhaps it was the night sky, or perhaps the alcohol, but everything seemed to tell me, now is the perfect time for heart-to-heart talks. I took a step forward and reached out. Hunter didn't move away. I smiled. My marriage has been a failure. I've always known he had someone on the side. As long as it didn't come to me, I let him be. People laugh at me for being foolish. He plays around so freely outside, and yet I still wear our wedding ring alone. The day I met you at the bar, news of him vacationing with someone else was released. It was his birthday, and I still foolishly thought I'd wait for him to come back to celebrate together. Little did I know, he already had someone celebrating with him. I was so sad that day, and when I got drunk, I thought, why can't I do the same? I looked at Hunter, and suddenly everything before me became a little blurry. The moonlight was peaceful. In this perfect atmosphere, it felt like there was a kind of magic that could turn lies into truth. Why am I the only one holding on? I touched Hunter's face, and he froze for a moment. "Emily," I said, and then I saw you. You're so special. You're unlike anyone I know. You give me a sense of distance, a feeling of loneliness, close yet far away. I've heard many people say they're lonely, but I think your loneliness is the true kind. It feels like deep down, it's only ever been you. You've been pretending. I lowered my head, our gazes locking. We were so close that our breaths almost touched. The young man's face gradually shifted from pink to red, like a pressure cooker with its valve tightened. I swallowed. Will you stay with me? Or, I leaned in close to his ear, softly saying, vouch for me with a cooperation opportunity. I stepped back 2 paces, almost laughing out loud in front of the prince. Hunter's face went through a whole range of expressions, and it took him a long time to realize what had just happened. His face turned dark, like it could drip water. Emily. The young man gritted his teeth as he called my name. I responded with a smile. Stop watching those melodramatic primetime shows, young master. I waved my hand. Get some rest, I'll pick you up for school tomorrow morning. Hunter didn't speak but looked at me, grinding his teeth. I turned and walked toward the door, but as my hand was about to touch the handle, the person behind me suddenly moved. The faint scent of alcohol surrounded me as the young man's imposing body pressed against mine. In a moment of distraction, a bony hand slid around my waist and landed on the lock. Clack. Uh-oh? Looks like I went too far. His teeth lightly grazed the back of my neck, leaving a faint, itchy bite mark, as though venting frustration. Emily. Hunter's voice was hoarse. There was an indescribable tone to his words, a mix of anger and indulgence. His other hand settled on my waist. You won. He pulled me into a heated embrace. His voice whispered in my ear, laced with a gritted edge, whether you want me, or the cooperation opportunity, it's all yours. Only one condition. Tomorrow, immediately kick that deadbeat husband of yours to the curb. Even clay figurines still have some fire left in them. I lay on the bed, my mind foggy and confused from the heat of the moment. The moonlight by the bed fell, and I curled my fingers, trying to grasp something. But someone's keen eyes caught it and slipped between my fingers, their hand intertwining with mine. The phone rang suddenly in the quiet night. I shook off the hand that had grasped mine and reached for the phone. The contact name on the screen cleared the haze in my mind. Lucas. It seemed my husband finally remembered that today was my birthday. And I still hadn't gone home. I was about to throw the phone aside when Hunter pressed the answer button before I could. Lucas's voice suddenly blared through. Emily? Why haven't you come home yet? Go back to your damn home, I answered in my mind. The The malicious bastard quietly exerted force, scattering the words I had in my mouth. That good-for-nothing was so sharp in this aspect. Emily, what are you doing? Just as I was about to speak, Hunter suddenly pressed the hang-up button. Lucas's yelling stopped abruptly. I looked up at Hunter. The young man lowered his head, and I quickly covered his mouth with my hand. From the conditions you gave, I thought. What a typical plot, TSK TSK. I smiled and raised my eyes. Young master, I didn't expect you to be the one with the horns. My palm was bitten. Hunter freed himself from my grip and bit into my shoulder. Emily. The prince's tone was dark. I'm a pure love kind of guy. Sometimes, the youth's strength could also be a mistake. When I got up, the prince was still sleeping, wrapped around me like an octopus. I pushed his hands away and quietly got out of bed. There were over 40 missed calls on my phone. From Lucas. I stopped the car as I passed them all. By the time I got home, it was almost noon. When I opened the door, I saw Lucas leaning against the living room sofa, his clothes and hair messy. His phone was beside him. There was also a cake on the coffee table. I walked over and reached out to smooth his hair, but suddenly, he grabbed me. Lucas opened his eyes, bloodshot, and asked, Emily. His tone was a bit stiff. Where did you go last night? Who were you with? He paused for a moment, suddenly realizing something, and reached out to touch my hand. Where's the ring? Emily. Where's your ring? It must have been taken off by some young master. I rolled my eyes, pulled my hand back, and smiled at Lucas. I brought you a gift. Under Lucas's confused gaze, I pulled a hat out of the shopping bag. It was bright green, gleaming with a fresh, vibrant color, a green hat. Ta-da! I placed the hat carefully on Lucas's head and took a couple of steps back to admire it. It suits you perfectly. A discerning eye, just as expected of me. Lucas looked like he might be so angry he could faint, and reached out to throw the hat violently onto the floor. We're both smart people. Lucas looked at me, his eyes heavy. Who is it? Are you going to cause trouble for him? We've been married, so I'd advise against it. Even if you want to trouble him, it won't be too much trouble for him. Who is it? Lucas pressed, unwilling to back down. I smiled. Hunter. The prince's name was quite well known, and it stunned Lucas for a moment. When he regained his composure, he grabbed my hand. Emily, are you lying to me? He didn't believe that someone like Hunter would be interested in a married woman. Or maybe, he didn't believe I would betray our marriage. I smiled and pulled out a document from my bag, tossing it in front of him. Divorce agreement. The document had been prepared for a long time. I'd been waiting for a long time, and Sophia still hadn't done anything useful. I sat across from him. Take a look. The division of assets is simple. What's yours is yours, what's mine is mine. I'm not trying to take advantage of you. I hope you can sign it today. The sooner we divorce, the better. Lucas didn't move. Emily, we don't have to divorce. If you mind Sophia, I can make her Lucas. I interrupted him, my tone sharp. I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm informing you. We can revise the contract if there are any issues, but the divorce is inevitable. Emily, I won't. Considering we've been married, I don't think we need to take it this far. I looked at him and uttered one word, financial falsification. Lucas's expression changed instantly. Mr. Lucas. I smiled. I'm sure you wouldn't want the media to know about this, would you? When Lucas went to the company, he took the divorce agreement with him. I knew by then that the divorce was almost certain. When I had some free time and looked at my phone, I realized I was bombarded with another round of text messages. Where are you? Did you go to the company? Are you busy? Is there something urgent, leaving so early? Why didn't you call me when you left? I wanted to have breakfast with you. Are you planning to not acknowledge me anymore? Crying cat head.jpg. I snapped a photo of the green hat on the floor and sent it over, went out early to deliver a gift. Young master. Impressive. Lucas's company was in serious financial trouble, with a senior executive embezzling a large sum of money. If this got out, his company would be in jeopardy. Though his old company had a solid foundation, it couldn't withstand his nepotism. The senior executive was somewhat related to Lucas by family. He didn't dare to hand the person over, so he had to find ways behind the scenes to cover the losses. I was afraid of pushing Lucas too far, worried that if he lost his face, he might drag me down with him. During the 30-day cooling-off period for the divorce, I still stayed at home and went to work as usual. But to irritate me, Lucas brought Sophia back. The two of them acted lovey-dovey at home every day. Occasionally, my gaze would fall on Sophia's abdomen. After more than a month, there was still no sign of anything. When Sophia met my eyes, she would quickly look away. I knew she hadn't dared to tell Lucas yet. The last day of the cooling-off period was a sunny day. I took Lucas's car to the Civil Affairs Bureau. In the few seconds while we were waiting for the red light, the atmosphere in the car became quiet and a bit heavy. Then Lucas suddenly spoke. There was no argument, no sarcasm. Emily. If I hadn't found someone else from the start, could we have kept going? Actually, Lucas and I had had a period that could be considered a happy time, maybe 3 months, maybe less. I can't remember clearly. From the first woman onward, there had never been a shortage of other women around him. The first time I caught him, he woke up drunk, smiled at me, and was as gentle as ever. Emily. He said, I hope you don't say something that will spoil the mood. I smiled at him, pushing down a bit of restlessness in my heart. I didn't ask who the woman was or why he did it. I only said, don't drink too much, it's bad for your health. It's probably true that people tend to become nostalgic when they're about to lose something. It wasn't that I truly regretted it. If I had to do it again, he would make the same choices. I didn't respond. When we got the divorce certificate, my heart finally settled down. As we walked out, Lucas's steps faltered for a moment. Emily, yes? I suddenly spoke. Lucas froze for a moment. I smiled at him. Yes. If you hadn't found anyone else, if it had just been the two of us together, we'd have grown old together. Maybe we'd have had a smart daughter, and she'd inherit our company. We could have retired and traveled the world together. Maybe in the end, we'd grow old, look at each other quietly, and promise to be together in the next life. I took a step forward, my eyes smiling. I reached out and adjusted Lucas's tie, just like when we first got married. Lucas's expression softened slightly. Emily. But you won't. I took a step back, avoiding his attempt to touch my hand, and looked at him coldly. You won't, Lucas. I know you, hypocritical, selfish, arrogant, promiscuous, irresponsible, and full of pretensions. His face darkened little by little. I know you too well, Lucas. And that's why I married you. I smiled. Enjoy it. Once we divorce, you'll realize your ex-wife's true, cold-blooded nature. Lucas stepped forward and brushed a strand of my hair from my cheek. His voice turned cold. Emily. He said, people like you will never get anyone's true heart. The former lover lowered his head and murmured, using the most affectionate tone to utter the most malicious curse. But who cares? Losing love is like a fish losing a bicycle. Suddenly, a sharp honk of a horn echoed on the road. I turned around, and Hunter, in his sports car, looked displeased. I took a step back, waved at him, and sincerely said goodbye. When I entered, Hunter turned to fasten my seatbelt. The young man stiffened his neck, refusing to look at me. I opened my mouth and bit his face. Hunter was startled, nearly banging his head against the roof of the car. His ears turned red. You? I'm learning from you. I smiled. Are you jealous? Hunter, his tone laced with sourness, said, we're divorced, and you're still tying his tie. I kissed his face. Don't worry, there's no love left. Hunter looked up at me, his eyes full of longing, like a puppy who was secretly sulking yet loved human attention. I pulled out my phone and called Lucas's old rival. Since I promised Lucas not to tell the media, what others do with the media is beyond my control. When news of Lucas's company broke, rumors about its decline spread. Lucas was extremely busy but stubbornly refused to admit it. It wasn't until one afternoon that Ava knocked on my office door, looking pleased. "President Emily," she said, her face lighting up. "Their company is issuing new stocks. The fish has bitten the hook. When people you no longer wish to see part ways, they won't say goodbye." Lucas's company survived the first round of public scrutiny and held its shareholders' meeting. The meeting room was clean and bright, and standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, one could clearly see the busy people below. I admired the view for a while and sighed deeply. The world really is one big pancake roll. The prince, wearing a mask and hat, insisted on coming along. "Wait, I'll go buy it." Outside, footsteps echoed as the shareholders hurried into the room. The last footstep on the hallway was so familiar, it reminded me of the time when we weren't married yet. I would hear this same hurried footstep when I went to the company to find him. A secretary whispered outside, "President Lucas, the person sitting at the main seat is the largest shareholder, the one who bought." The chair's wheels spun, making a barely audible sound on the thick carpet. I turned around, leaned on the table, and smiled at Lucas. "Long time no see, Lucas. I didn't expect us to meet again so soon." Lucas's expression nearly cracked. When we shook hands, he applied almost all of his strength. I didn't hold back either, and my freshly done nails were no less harsh. The meeting didn't go smoothly, as I diligently found fault with Lucas's company. Not that it was my fault, his company had too many flaws. Several times, Lucas almost lost his composure when facing my questions. The more angry he became, the happier I felt. As the meeting ended, shareholders slowly trickled out, some wanting to chat with me but being intercepted halfway by Lucas. He stood in front of me, his tall figure blocking the way. Lucas lowered his eyes, his gaze heavy and dark. "Emily. You really are." He gritted his teeth, "despicable." I stopped Hunter, who was about to charge in, and patted Lucas's shoulder with a mock expression. "Lucas, this is your fault. Business matters can't be called despicable," I smiled and said, my eyes cold. "You couldn't protect your company. Don't blame others. Business is ruthless, surrounded by wolves. Who knows who will bite whom once they see the prey." As I left Lucas's company and sat in the car, I suddenly saw a familiar figure at the entrance. Someone held my hand. Hunter took off his hat, his bangs slightly messy. He lowered his eyes, holding a wet wipe, carefully wiping my hand, gently brushing over every fingertip. Outside the car window, a tearful beauty stood, blocked by the security guard. Sophia had become much thinner, but even so, she still had a broken beauty about her. "Please, let me in. I just want to say a few words to President Lucas. I won't take long." Her beautiful face was stained with tears, but the guard remained unmoved. "Miss, without permission, we cannot let you in. Please, let me in to see him." Sophia nearly knelt as she tried to convince them. The automatic doors suddenly opened, and Lucas walked out, his face dark. Sophia froze, then immediately ran toward him. "Lucas! Lucas! Why won't you see me? What did I do wrong?" The guard quickly tried to stop her. "Miss, don't do this." Lucas stood still, his eyes flicking over her face with no reaction. "Next time, I don't want to see her at the company entrance." "Lucas! You can't do this." Sophia gritted her teeth. "I'm pregnant with your child." Lucas's expression didn't change. "If you're pregnant, get an abortion. Of course, if you want to be a single mother, it's up to you." Sophia seemed to lose the last bit of strength in her. She didn't resist anymore and just stared blankly as Lucas got into the car, leaving her standing there, lost. I watched the whole scene, then closed the car window. "Let's go." The car stopped at the entrance of the company. I reached for my seatbelt, but my hand was held down. Someone leaned in and kissed me softly on the lips, with an irresistible tenderness. The hand that was held down was firmly clasped in his, a warm ring circling my finger. When we pulled away, Hunter's earlobes were flushed, like pink jade. I looked at the ring in my hand and asked, "A declaration of ownership?" Hunter blushed, like a child guarding his candy. "I can't just follow you around without a label." I turned to admire his handsome face, smiling. Aren't you afraid? Afraid I might still look for someone else? Young master. I spoke gently, a businessman values profit, not separation. Hunter met my gaze without flinching. In his eyes, I saw a smaller reflection of myself. He smiled and calmly asked, would you? It's hard to say. My moral bottom line has always been flexible. It rises when it meets a high point, and sinks when it meets a low one. So what now? The prince murmured softly, seemingly troubled. Fortunately, I have a lot of money. It was so cute. I almost laughed out loud, my eyes curving into a smile. I took the young man's hand, and on his jade-like knuckles, the matching wedding ring we both wore sparkled. I lowered my head and kissed the ring. Then I guess I'll offer myself to you. Side story, dog knows, it was the second day of the Chinese New Year, and Hunter was dragged by his friends to watch a high school competition at the track field. The women's 800-meter final was in full swing, with a crowd gathered around the finish line, chattering excitedly. His friends pushed him to the front. Amid the deafening cheers, one name stood out, Emily. Hunter raised an eyebrow and asked his friend, who's Emily? His friend pointed to the girl at the front of the pack. That's her. You don't know her? Hunter asked back, do I need to? His friend rubbed his nose. Not really. It's just that she's very well known at school. She's always in the top 3 academically, part of the student council, beautiful, and I've heard she's a nice person too. Hunter didn't comment. The cheers around them grew louder as the girl at the front approached the finish line. Hunter looked up, catching the girl's smiling gaze under the sunlight. Her ponytail swayed as Emily's face turned flushed from the heat. Peach. The word peach instinctively flashed through Hunter's mind. He paused for a moment, before Emily crossed the finish line. Amid the cheering, she couldn't slow down in time and bumped into the person ahead of her. Hunter instinctively reached out. Knocked off balance by the force, he caught the 800-meter champion in his arms. The warm, soft sensation on his chest was more striking than the pain of his elbow scraping against something. In that moment, when his body temperature rose, one thought filled his mind, the scent of camellias. Hunter rarely dreamed. His sleep quality was always good. So when he woke up from his bed, he was almost scared out of a cold sweat. The dream wasn't exactly terrifying, and could even be considered beautiful. For the first time, his youthful thoughts brushed against the edge of adolescence. In the dream, the girl was simply holding his hand as they walked slowly along a park path. Just before he woke up, the girl smiled and buried her head in his arms, tilting her face to kiss his dimple. The sunlight filtered through the layers of tree leaves and gently fell on her face. Her graceful features, a charming smile, and sparkling eyes, her face was Emily's. The result of his body entering puberty before his mind was that when he woke up, he saw the flag raised high and standing straight, greeting him. Hunter covered his face with his hand, chastising himself as filthy, vile, and depraved. Though his family's century-old heritage couldn't be called a scholarly household, it still maintained a reputation for family integrity. The wealthy young master, full of vigor and pride, this was the first time he despised himself so much. On his 21st birthday, Hunter was tricked by his rowdy friends into going to an entertainment venue. When he saw the crowd of beautiful girls in the private room, he realized he'd been set up. His friends sat on the side, enjoying the show as the girls swarmed around him, blocking all his escape routes. Hunter stood in the circle, his ears ringing, feeling like his head was about to explode, mostly because of his annoying friends. Finally, he found an excuse to go to the bathroom and sneak away. In the hallway, he tried to call his friends, but before the call went through, a girl stopped him and confessed her feelings. His 20 years of self-control forced him to suppress his anger and politely decline. The young girl ran away, covering her face. On the other end, his friend gleefully said, "A few more girls went out looking for you just now. Next time you do this, you're finished," Hunter said coldly. Finally realizing that the prince was in an extremely bad mood, his friend apologized and tried to calm him down. Hunter hadn't hung up the phone yet, so he heard the confession from the other side. Then, someone wrapped their arms around him from behind, and the scent of camellias filled the air, vividly awakening every sensation in Hunter's body. The voice in his ear, tinged with laughter, was familiar like an old friend. "Young master, I'm not like those women. I'm a married woman." The sensation hit him like a deer almost colliding with his heart. Hunter, lacking experience, felt overwhelmed. But fortunately, he was young, full of passion, and brimming with energy and strength. There was also the surge of love, possessiveness, and a bit of jealousy that broke free under the pressure of ethics and social morality. Hunter lowered his head. In the snow, plum blossoms bloomed, cascading down. The room was dark, with only their heavy breaths and the quiet night ringing in the silence. His face was suddenly cupped by someone's hands. Hunter raised his eyes. Emily's hair spread out on the white sheets, and the moonlight outside shone into her eyes, causing her lashes to glisten with tears. Her eyes, filled with moonlight, sparkled like gemstones washed by water, shimmering softly in the dim room. Emily met his gaze, her eyes filled with a smile. "Are you a dog?" Hunter couldn't help but think of a nursery rhyme he learned in his pure, innocent childhood. In the snow, a group of little painters came. The little chicks painted bamboo leaves. The little dogs painted plum blossoms. The little dogs painted plum blossoms. A faint smile escaped Hunter's throat. He lowered his head, kissing her brow, his lips carrying a light tickling sensation. The scent of camellias lingered on his nose. Her teasing question made him respond with all seriousness, "Maybe."